Order, please. We'll begin the daily routine. Presenting reading petitions. Presenting reports of committees. Tabling reports, regulations, and other papers. Statements by ministers. The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, I'd like to start by saying that I very much appreciate the indulgence of the opposition parties in allowing me to do this on very short notice. This is the last sitting day we're going to have during Foster Families Appreciation Week, and last night I feel that I was blessed to be able to attend a beautiful function over in Shearwater to honor some of the people that are involved in fostering. And it was a very moving experience, and as best I can, I'd like to share a little bit of it here today. There are two things that in particular. One is I'd like to talk about how you should never give up on a child. I met one young foster mother there. Her name is Nancy, and I would just say that just like Barb, who we introduced here the other day in the legislature, there are more people that potentially could be on the Pope's list for sainthood in addition to Mother Teresa. These are beautiful people. Nancy was offered the chance to take in a newborn baby, 3 weeks old, hydrosalphic. The doctor said that the little girl would never be able to eat on her own. She'd never be able to sit up, never be able to talk, never be able to walk. He said that she was a vegetable and she'd remain a vegetable. And furthermore, if this foster mom adopted her, you could probably also expect the little girl to die shortly. There was no question, on Nancy's part, that little girl was coming home. She not only brought her home, she adopted her. It is now 4 years later. There have been numerous operations, including placing a shunt in the little girl's head to address the swelling. And I want to tell you, I saw the picture that was proudly carried by the mom and the foster sister of a beautiful four-year-old girl. I guess she's smarter than I am because she speaks 2 languages. First of all, she learned to sign, and now she's learning to speak English. And she's looking forward to going to school. I would tell you, honorable members, that the power of love should never be underestimated by the healthcare profession. That is one story, Mr. Speaker. The other one is about this very accomplished young girl that greeted me when I came in. I'm not able to use her full name because she's a foster child, but her first name is Tamika, and she made quite an impression. And she was one of the first speakers to address us. And now this is her perspective of being a foster child and what it means to her and other foster children. And this is what she shared with us that evening. I am 13 years old. My brother, sister, and I have been with my family for 6 years and plan to be here forever. I just wanted to give all the foster parents a special thanks for all your hard work. And if it wasn't for you wonderful people, where would children be? Every child wants a home and parents to call their own. But a lot of kids don't get that. And that's why we have to be thankful for what we have and not what we don't have. This is a dream come true for me, to have such a great home and family who love me no matter what. So on behalf of all the foster children all over Nova Scotia, I would like to make a toast of thanks. That's from Tamika. She's a 13-year-old foster child. And I guess, Mr. Speaker, it was a very moving experience to be in that room. The love and caring was electric. And the point of this, Mr. Speaker, is to say that for men and women out there who have something to share, or perhaps who are missing something in their lives, this is a wonderful opportunity to become a foster parent. And again, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the opposition parties for allowing me to make this statement today.
Thank you. The honourable member for Dartmouth-Portland Valley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The official opposition wants to join with the minister and his government in paying tribute to the 700 foster families across Nova Scotia. The generosity of love, time and energy that they share with one another is very inspiring. And I especially want to congratulate the children who paid tribute to their foster parents last evening for the wonderful job that they did. Children are our greatest investment and resource in Nova Scotia, and they deserve to be treated with the utmost of care and love, and should be treasured and protected by all Nova Scotians. So I just encourage us all to keep that in mind during our upcoming budget discussions. Thank you.
Thank you. The honourable member for Cape Breton South.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Pleased to rise in my place here today and join with the government and the official opposition in paying tribute to foster parents. And while this week is Foster Parents Appreciation Week, I think we would all agree in this House that every week should be Foster Parents Appreciation Week. They are very special people, and there are many Tamikas out there in Nova Scotia, you know, who need the love and nourishment of foster parents in this province. And certainly, I want to congratulate the minister for making us aware of that this morning, and to say to the minister that all of us, I believe, in this House, really and truly know about the value of foster parents, because I think each and every one of us have probably had a personal experience with foster parents or with foster children in one way or the other, either by extension in our families or by friends and neighbours who have nourished and loved foster children over the years. So, Mr. Speaker, I just want to join with the other two parties in saying thank you to the Minister for bringing this forward. And as I said at the outset, every week should be Foster Parents Week. Okay.
Thank you. Any further statements by ministers? Government notice of motion. The Honourable Minister of Environment and Labour.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas October 20th to 26th is Waste Reduction Week in Nova Scotia, and whereas Nova Scotia continues to be a leader in diversion of waste management from landfills through reuse and recycling, and whereas everyone needs to be involved in maintaining this leadership position, therefore be it resolved that this House urge all Nova Scotians to participate in one of the many community swap shops, recycling demonstrations, and composting workshops to be held this weekend to conclude another successful Waste Reduction Week in Nova Scotia. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Education.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Katie Atkinson, Emily Clark, Natalie Lamoth, and Jay McNeil, winners at the Regional Science Fair in Truro, were members of Team Nova Scotia for the Canada-wide Science Fair in Calgary last spring. Whereas these young scientists will display their exhibits here at Province House this morning to mark National Science and Technology Week. Whereas the Truro area is a hotbed for science fair enthusiasm, winning the bid to host the national event in Truro in 2007, and home to students who won 3 silver medals and several awards at the 2003 event. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House applaud the commitment of students, teachers, parents, and administrators in Truro and Bible Hill and across the province for making science learning relevant and fun. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate, and before you call that, I would invite all members to go downstairs into the foyer later on this morning and to see those exhibits.
Request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Economic Development.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Nova Scotia Liquor Corporation is continuing to make it difficult for minors to purchase alcohol, and whereas the corporation Don't Buy for Minors and Check 25 IDs have been very successful in bringing awareness to the problem of underage drinking and in preventing it, and whereas between January and June of this year, liquor store employees asked more than 135,000 customers for legal identification, turning more than 7,000 customers away for inadequate identification. Therefore, be it resolved that members of this House acknowledge the dedication of all those who work for the Nova Scotia Liquor Corporation, both in the stores and out, and who have made the Check 25 and Don't Buy from Minors program so successful. Mr. Speaker, I respectfully request waiver of notice.
Request for waivers is agreed. All those in favor say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Agriculture and Fisheries.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Hereby give notice on a future day shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the community of Escazone has worked hard in becoming a leader in the local aquaculture industry and is leading the way in protecting the Bredor Lakes, and whereas this year the province was pleased to recognize Escazone for their leadership in the field of aquaculture, and whereas the aquaculture initiatives in Escazone are good examples of cooperation and collaboration with federal, provincial, municipal, and First Nation governments. Therefore, be it resolved that the members of this House join me in recognizing all those involved in the aquaculture industry in Escazone and wish them much success in their future aquaculture endeavors. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice.
Request for waivers is agreed. All those in favor say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Tourism and Culture.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas 48 visitors from Ontario enjoyed Cape Breton's famous hospitality after their bus became unable to transport them to their next destination. Whereas organizers for the Celtic Colours Music Festival quickly arranged for transportation of the stranded visitors to their next destination. And whereas while the travelers waited for alternative rides, they were made comfortable in Cape Breton style with refreshments and music at the Canadian Legion in Iona. Therefore, be it resolved that the members of this House recognize Blair Brown and all the Celtic Colours volunteers who have continued Cape Breton's fine tradition of hospitality and friendship to the visitors of our province. And Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Request for waivers is agreed. All those in favor say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm giving this on behalf of my seatmate, the Minister of Energy. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice in a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Imperial Oil Foundation will contribute $250,000 to the Nova Scotia Community College Marconi campus over the next 5 years. And whereas the money will be used to enhance the oil and gas program in refinery process operations. And whereas the enhanced curriculum will be developed in partnership between the college and Imperial Oil to help develop workers who will meet the needs of Nova Scotia's growing offshore oil and gas industry. Therefore, be it resolved that the members of this House join me in acknowledging Imperial Oil's ongoing commitment to grow a successful oil and gas industry in this province and extend to them our appreciation for their efforts to increase educational opportunities in this industry in Nova Scotia. And Mr. Speaker, I request waiver.
Request for waivers is agreed. All those in favor say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. Introduction of bills. The Honourable Member for Hants East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act Respecting the Appointment and Duties of a Commissioner on Resources and Environment.
The Honourable Member for Hants East begs leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act Respecting the Appointment and Duties of a Commissioner on Resources and Environment.
Bill 28, entitled An Act Respecting the Appointment and Duties of a Commissioner on Resources and Environment.
Or this bill be read a second time at a future date. The Honourable Member for Hants East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 179 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Forest Act.
The Honourable Member for Hants East begs leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 179 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Forest Act.
Bill 29, entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 179, the Revised Statutes 1989, the Forests Act.
Will this bill be read a second time at a future date? Notice of motion. The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I will move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Metro Transit's William Hartnett observed that one of his passengers was in need of assistance, and whereas following the Metro Transit procedures, Mr. Hartnett and other staff confirmed that the passenger appeared to be in need of immediate medical assistance. And whereas the Metro Transit passenger was taken to the Dartmouth General Hospital emergency room where she was treated for a life-threatening diabetic coma. Therefore, be it resolved, this House congratulate William Hartnett, his co-workers, and Metro Transit for their procedures and prompt attention with which they ensured that a passenger received life-saving emergency medical treatment. And Mr. Speaker, I would request waiver and passage without debate.
Request for waivers is agreed. All those in favor say aye. Counterminded, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Cape Breton South.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the accounting firm of Ernst & Young is involved in a secret process to clean up Cisco with $250 million in taxpayers' dollars, and whereas the Cisco cleanup is being conducted under a veil of secrecy with no accountability to this legislature, and whereas the people have a right to know how their tax dollars are being spent, therefore be it resolved that the members of this House demand that the government release a full accounting of the Cisco cleanup since Ernst & Young became the principal operator of Sydney Steel.
Notice is tabled. The honourable member for Pictou East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the upcoming expansion to the Stellarton campus of the Nova Scotia Community College will increase the accessibility of education for the students of Pictou County and will provide increased benefits to the community. And whereas Stellarton Mayor Art Fett and Nova Scotia Community College Principal Mike Hill have been working together to find ways in which the new community college facility can be accessed by the town activities. And whereas the $11 million expansion of the Stellarton campus will increase the student population from 360 to more than 900 students. Therefore, be it resolved that the members of this House recognize the excellent investment this government has made in the community colleges that will not only benefit those students seeking to expand their skills, but the entire communities. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver.
Request for waivers is agreed. All those in favor say aye. Counterminded, nay. Motion is carried. The member for Cole Harbour Eastern Passage.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Edith Marie Myers was born on October 30th, 1913 in Eastern Passage, where she has lived all her life. Whereas Mrs. Myers, with her husband, raised 5 children, Stephen, Roseanne, Lorraine, Paul, and Joan. Whereas Mrs. Myers has 7 grandchildren and 4 great-grandchildren. Therefore, be it resolved that this House congratulate Edith Marie Myers on her 90th birthday and wish her many more years of health and happiness. I ask for waiver, Mr. Speaker.
Request for waivers is agreed. All those in favor say aye. Counterminded, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Halifax Clayton Park.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Nova Scotians are being reminded to play games of chance responsibly during Nova Scotia's 2nd Responsible Gaming Awareness Week, being held from October 19th to the 25th, 2003. And whereas this week's overall focus is to educate people and heighten awareness about the importance of playing games of chance responsibly. Whereas the key message being promoted during the week is part of playing responsibly is knowing you can't control the game. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House promote responsible gaming, not just during this week, but throughout the year. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Request for waivers is agreed. All those in favor say aye. Counterminded, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Colchester North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas in Truro on October the 16th, the MLA for Colchester-Musquodoboit Valley and myself, the member for Colchester North, attended the 11th Annual Atlantic Women in Law Enforcement Awards banquet entitled A Time to Reflect. And whereas women still consist of less than 12% of all police officers in Canada, with 140 of them working here in Nova Scotia. And whereas the conference has become so popular that because of information sessions on everything from homicide investigations to shift work sleep and balancing the job with your children, the male police officers now attend because of the excellent training opportunities presented at this conference. Therefore, be it resolved, MLAs acknowledge the critical importance of work by female law enforcement officers across Nova Scotia and applaud them on the conclusion of another successful conference. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver.
Request for waivers is agreed. All those in favor say aye. Counterminded, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Halifax Fairview.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'll be seeking waiver for this resolution. Whereas whereas on October 23, 2003, New Brunswick Premier Bernard Lord and Manitoba Premier Gary Dewar met in Fredericton to discuss interprovincial cooperation. And whereas one topic was the noteworthy success and wide public support for Manitoba public insurance, which has backing from all three parties in the Manitoba legislature. And whereas Premier Lord acknowledged that Manitobans have good reason to be proud of the public auto insurance plan, which provides lower rates and much better benefits than will be available in Nova Scotia. Therefore, be it resolved, this House urges the government of this province and their Liberal allies to learn the lessons from decades of success with public auto insurance in Canada, instead of digging in deeper to defend a system that has enraged Nova Scotia drivers with unfair rates, arbitrary treatment, and a 65% overall increase in premium costs in just one painful year.
Request for waivers is agreed. There are several noes. Noes is tabled. The honourable member for Glace Bay.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution.
Order,
whereas
please.
October...
Order, please. The honourable member for Glace Bay has the floor.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas October is designated as Celiac Awareness Month in Nova Scotia. Whereas celiac disease is a digestive disease that damages the small intestine and interferes with the absorption of nutrients from food. And whereas the Halifax chapter of the Canadian Celiac Association, one of 27 chapters in Canada, makes celiac awareness a cornerstone of their mandate. Therefore, be it resolved, all members of this House extend our best wishes to the Halifax chapter of the Celiac Association in their future endeavors, including their role as host of the 2004 National Conference to be held in Halifax on May 28th, 29th, and 30th of 2004. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Request for waivers is agreed. All those in favour say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. The motion is carried. The honourable member for Kings North.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas literate citizens are more likely to be employed in better and higher paying jobs, enjoy better health, take part in community activities, and are less likely to be in conflict with the law. And whereas in Kings County, 1 in 4 adults has difficulty with basic reading, writing, and math skills. And whereas the Kings County Learning Association in Kentville will officially open its doors on November 5th of this year and will provide a wide range of programs for adults to learn or improve their writing, reading, and math skills. Therefore, be it resolved that members of this House join me in congratulating all the volunteers involved in making the programs of Kings County Learning Association possible, and extend to them our best wishes as they establish this very valuable initiative. And I request waiver of notice.
Request for waivers is agreed. All those in favour say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Dartmouth South, Portland Valley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I present this on behalf of my honourable colleague from Halifax Atlantic. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas October 20 to October 26 marks Public Library Week in Nova Scotia, and whereas libraries across the province are holding events this week commemorating this year's theme, Look at Us Now, and whereas on Saturday, October 25th, 2003, the Captain William Spry Library will celebrate with a puppet show, cake, and visits from local dignitaries. Therefore, be it resolved that members of the Legislative Assembly congratulate the staff, trustees, and many volunteers on making the Captain Spry Library such an important part of our community, and wish them every success at their public library event tomorrow. I request waiver and passage without debate.
For waivers is agreed. All those in favour say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Education.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Heather Topley of Truro has been named the Atlantic Region winner of the Young Scientist Footprint Award by the Council for Biotechnology Information Canada, and whereas the $5,000 Young Scientist Footprint Award is presented in 5 regions in Canada in recognition of the 50th anniversary of the discovery of the structure of DNA in 1953. And whereas Heather Topley, who is a master's degree candidate at the Nova Scotia Agricultural College, earned the award for genetics research in potatoes. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House congratulate Heather Topley on receiving a Young Scientist Footprints Award and wish her continued success in her academic pursuits and in her future career. And Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice.
Request for waivers, is agreed? I hear a no. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Timberley Prospect.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'll be asking for waiver and passage without debate. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Royal Canadian Legions across Nova Scotia are recognized for their involvement and dedication, whereas Atlantic Branch Royal Canadian Legion 153 in Whites Lake provides valuable service in our community, whereas veterans and Legion members will hold Remembrance Day ceremonies on November 11th, therefore be it resolved that this House of Assembly congratulate and thank the members of the Royal Canadian Legion Branch 153 for their commitment to our province, our country, and our history. I ask for waiver and passage without debate, Mr. Speaker.
Request for waivers, is agreed? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member Timberley Prospect.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'll be asking for waiver and passage without debate. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Royal Canadian Legions across Nova Scotia are recognized for their involvement and dedication, whereas the MacDonald Branch Royal Canadian Legion 156 in Lakeside provides valuable leadership in our community, whereas veterans and Legion members will hold Remembrance Day ceremonies on the 11th of November, therefore be it resolved that the House of Assembly congratulate and thank the members of the Royal Canadian Legion Branch 156 for its commitment to our history, our country, and our province. I ask for waiver and passage without debate, Mr. Speaker.
Request for waivers, is agreed? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Glace Bay.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the weather is beginning to turn colder as we approach the winter and, of course, the holiday season, and whereas as the holiday season turns into the new year, charity groups throughout Nova Scotia will need help more than ever. And whereas in a failed attempt to balance the budget, this government continues to take money that would have gone to charity, but instead is going to pad the bottom line. Therefore, be it resolved, the members of this House recognize that government should apologize to charity groups for denying them a source of funding and, as an act of contrition, re-establish a Sydney Casino Charity Trust.
Notice tabled. Or is the day government business? The Honourable Government House Leader. Government business.
Oh, thank you, Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, would you please call the order of business public bills for second reading?
Public bills for second reading.
Mr. Speaker, would you please call Bill number 20, the Workers' Compensation Act / Occupational Health and Safety Act?
Bill number 20. The honourable member for Timberley Prospect.
I'll show you now. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and for the members of the House who had the opportunity to hear me make some comments the other day. And I know the member, particularly from Lunenburg West, is always intrigued with a history lesson or two for me. So today I'm going to make myself useful again, as he would say on certain occasions, and bring Lunenburg and bring out that there are some examples, because Mr. Speaker, I can remember exactly where I was the other day on this topic of Bill 20. I had had the opportunity to mention the impact of Bill 20, or the impact of injured workers, and I had gone through, for the information of members of the House, some personal cases in which I had been involved as an MLA, and I hope members opposite take the opportunity, and I know members of our caucus are taking the opportunity to stand in their place and speak on this piece of legislation. This Bill 20, after all, that has resulted, and it's important that members understand that, not the hypothetical situation that I'm going to bring forward, but if, and there's that word if, Mr. Speaker, if the Supreme Court of Canada had not brought forward that decision that we had been waiting for so long, if that had not been brought forward, would there have been a Bill 20? Well, that's a question that I guess we'll just have to speculate on, because we have this piece of legislation, and this piece of legislation is going to move on to law amendments, at which time members opposite, members of this caucus, and the members of the third party will have the opportunity, if they haven't had already, the opportunity to listen to injured workers. And as I've said before in my comments, Mr. Speaker, I want you to know there is probably no more emotional topic than I've ever dealt with in my years as an MLA than this topic of injured workers. But Mr. Speaker, if I may, I want to bring to the attention of the House an incident, and again, Mr. Speaker, with your indulgence, I'm not mentioning names as I usually do, because with the permission of these workers and families that I've been referring to, I'm not going to use their names, I'm not going to use their addresses, I'm certainly not going to make any more than a passing reference to who they are and what their injuries are without their names, Mr. Speaker, because many of these injured workers are worried about the response that the WCB will have to me raising their cases here, because some of them are still under review. I mean, when you get into the review with the workers' compensation bill, Mr. Speaker, it doesn't take months, it takes years. The backlog and the unfortunate backlog and the absolute animosity that's created between injured workers and the WCB is certainly tragic. So, Mr. Speaker, I want to bring to your attention an incident that happened while I was the school principal in the community that I'm fortunate enough now to represent. There was a young man and a young girl in this school, Mr. Speaker, and they were in grade 8 at the time, and both in the same grade. And I want you to know, Mr. Speaker, that they were pretty fine kids. This one Friday morning, however, the young guy was sent to my office, as is the habit in schools when students are misbehaving. And I was quite surprised to see him come into my office. And I said to him, typical school administrator on a grumpy Friday morning, "What are you doing here?" "Oh, Miss So-and-so sent me to the office, Mr. Esterwicks," he said. So I said, "You go in my office and you sit down and don't you move." In my usual diplomatic fashion, I figured, now, I've never had this little fellow in my office before, so what's the problem? This is about 9:15 in the morning, Mr. Speaker. I went up to his English teacher, who was also his homeroom teacher, and I said to the teacher, a veteran, experienced teacher, who took care of many of her own problems in her classroom and referred very few kids to my office. I said to that teacher, if I may, Mr. Speaker, I'd just insert his name without reference to his real name. What's Johnny doing in my office? And the teacher said to me, "He's asleep. I can't keep him awake." 9:15 in the morning. So I go back to my office. And as I come into the office, the secretary stops me. And she goes, "If I may, shh," as she shushes me on occasion that many women have been telling me to do recently. And she tells me to be quiet. Because, Mr. Speaker, in my office, on probably one of the most uncomfortable chairs deliberately put there just to get the attention of a student that's sent to your office, the young man was asleep again. By this time, it might have been at the outside 9:30. So, my first intent is to say, what's going on here? But my secretary has said, or let me put it clearly, the school secretary has said, no, let him sleep. Don't you know about his father? Now, I had been in the school at that time 2 school years. And I said to that wonderful school secretary, Donna Hopkinson at Brookside Junior High, "Donna, what's the story on this young fella?" "His father's an injured worker, Bill." "His father's an injured worker? What's that got to do with it?" So I call his father. And I'm talking to him on the phone. By this time, it's about maybe 9:45. His son's asleep in my office. And I say to the dad, "Listen, is there any chance you could come up to school and pick Johnny up because he's asleep in my office?" And I don't really understand the fact at this time of the day there should be a problem. And this is the personal part that I know some members don't want to hear. That father of that young man in my office said, Mr. Estabrooks, I can't come and get him because I'm drunk and I've been on a 2-day bender. And the kids weren't in their own home last night. They were not sleeping in their own bed last night. Now, Mr. Speaker, that's a personal example that stuck with me. And when I began to hear of the workers' compensation, and when I began to realize some of the implications that come from injured workers, I'll tell you, that personal incident, along with some other incidents that I can bring to your attention, Mr. Speaker, that has stuck with me for the longest time. So, of course, the young man needed some sleep. His sister miraculously made it through the school day. The young man needs some sleep. So I woke him up, and I said to him, come on, I was talking to Dad. I'll take you home. No, sir, I don't go home. I said, I'm talking to your dad. Your dad and I are going to have a chat. So I went home. The dad, I guess we could use the expression, Mr. Speaker, you know what I speak. The dad was in pretty hard shape. But he was feeling remorse and guilt. He hugged his son and sent him off to his bedroom. Then I sat down that Friday morning in the kitchen with that injured worker. And I listened to what he spoke. Now, Mr. Speaker, I have, at that stage, never dealt with an injured worker. I, under no circumstances, wasn't aware of all of the complications and the frustrations and the delays, because, of course, Mr. Speaker, I never had been personally involved. I was a school teacher in my community, and as a school administrator, I had the opportunity to deal with many problems. I had never been confronted with a young man asleep, first period in the day, and then asleep in my office because of the situation that his father was an injured worker. And I want to tell you what that injured worker said to me that morning, because he felt bad. I think he felt bad for a couple of reasons, because of what he had been imbibing for the last couple of evenings in his home and for what had happened to his family. But one of the things that he said to me that day, Mr. Speaker, was very curtly put this way. I feel that I should have a brand right on my forehead. Injured worker. It's like it's a target for me. Injured worker. I can walk around my community and I can have it right on my forehead. Injured worker. And the community can say, oh, the poor injured worker. We understand his problem. We understand the problems that it's caused in his family. We understand the problems that it's caused for his children in his school. That way, the community could be receptive to the fact that when you're an injured worker, it's not just something physically. The other results and the other things that happen to you and your family are much deeper than just being injured. Now, that's another example that I want members here to be present for. These people aren't just numbers. They are real people. They are people who are hurting. And through no fault of their own, Mr. Speaker, this is key, through no fault of their own, they were hurt at work. They should not and must not be treated like criminals, because many of them feel that way. Now, that particular injured worker, after he was hurt at work, he's told, go to your doctor, get the forms, get them completed, and have them into workers' comp. The well-intentioned injured worker, of course, knows the doctor, goes to the family doctor. The family doctor knows the man is injured. He, of course, realizes this man has worked hard all his life. Why would he be shrinking his responsibilities for his family? Do you think he wants to have to lay home on the sofa because of his injury to his back? Do you think that he doesn't want to go to work and feel that he is a contributing member of the economy of this province and of this country? So, of course, the family doctor completes the necessary forms, writes the letters, says what the problem is, and it's all sent off to workers' comp. But then the maze begins. And I know members opposite have heard of this. I know members of both sides of the House have heard of this. Because it doesn't make any difference This is his family doctor. This doctor knows the history of this man. This is a doctor who's been in the community a long time. He's aware of the physical situation of this doctor. But guess what? There is a doctor at workers' compensation who has never met the injured worker, who doesn't know the circumstances in the family, doesn't know about the circumstances in the community, and that doctor who works for workers' compensation, suddenly he puts in a report that says, well, we just can't settle for this, we can't settle for that, that's not that serious of an injury. He never once consulted or met with that injured worker, but based upon what a family physician, in probably a rushed situation, filled out, there is a doctor who is going to put in another report contradicting the very family doctor who knows the situation so well. So the reaction from injured workers is, this isn't fair. This isn't the way to be treated. I'm going to appeal this. And in certain situations, Mr. Speaker, injured workers, believing, after all, it wasn't their fault that they were injured at work, they'll say, the government will take care of me. Not my fault. I'm going to go to this appeal. And many of them go with their wives, with their partner, and go to an appeal. And Mr. Speaker, it is one intimidating process. And the intimidating process of it, and I encourage members opposite to go visit that particular building. And the security as you enter the lobby in that building, I want you to know, Mr. Speaker, will rival coming into Dorchester Penitentiary. And you know, Mr. Speaker, from that personal experience of which I've spoken in this House before, having worked at Dorchester Penitentiary as a school teacher, and having seen a federal maximum at that time, because of that time that was the federal maximum penitentiary for the Atlantic provinces. There was no Renous prison on the Miramichi at that time. But when the comparison can be made to going into the main foyer at workers' comp to the same entrance as you come into the main hall at Dorchester Penitentiary, you have that feeling of there's some suppression going to happen here. Security, locked doors, identification, all the things. When an injured worker arrives for an appeal, he's saying, am I going to be listened to here in the midst of this atmosphere? Well, Mr. Speaker, I've had the opportunity to go to these appeals. In fact, I encourage all members present, when an injured worker comes to your office, when an injured worker contacts you, your number one responsibility is to say to that injured worker, I'll go to the appeal. Now, the first reaction, of course, always comes when you go to the appeal. You were a school teacher. You're not a lawyer. Well, heaven forbid. You're telling me that as an elected official who wants to make this case for an injured worker, that I have to know all the legalese and all the expertise of what I didn't get as an education? Instead, I can bring, and you all can bring as MLAs, the personal circumstances of what has happened to some of these injured workers. Mr. Speaker, I want to tell you of one of those cases. I want to tell you of a case that was, in my opinion, a wrong decision from the first. Again, another injured worker, hurt through no fault of his own. An injured worker from one of the coastal communities that I represent. And let me tell you, Mr. Speaker, he's not, and he will admit it, a well-educated man. He's one of those typical men of his age who has those big hands and that big heart, and he's worked hard all his life. And of course, unfortunately, he was injured at work. So, Mr. Speaker, we go through the process of the paper appeal. We go through the process of having all the documentation in place. We've got the medical evidence. This man is injured. It's a known fact. The community is aware of his injury. The community is aware of what happened at the accident. But you know, he was at that time 53 years of age. And it was decided through various processes, work hardening and retraining, that this 53-year-old man who has worked all his life on the government wharf, in the fish store, in the war, on the wharves, on the boats where he has worked, that this man should be retrained as a parking lot attendant. A parking lot attendant, Mr. Speaker. Now, I can remember when that news was dropped on that particular man that day. Now, Mr. Speaker, as I have been wanting to do in certain occasions, I can be a little impatient and a little abrupt. In fact, on that day, I will tell you, I was very impatient and very abrupt, because it would seem to me to be absolutely shameful for anyone to suggest to a 53-year-old man with a limited formal education who had worked hard his whole life during his employment career that he was going to be told, "We cannot help you, you are going to be a parking lot attendant." Now, as members know, and I've made it in my comments earlier, I'm not mentioning the location of these particular injured workers. But I'll put it to you this way, that the closest parking lot to this man's home is a few kilometers away. We might even say Peggy's Cove is the closest one. So we are going to take this man in a coastal community who has been injured through no fault of his own, and we are, as has been suggested, we're going to make him a parking lot attendant in Peggy's Cove. Now, Peggy's Cove is not that far from the community from where this man lives. And not that the locals, if I can call ourselves that, spend a lot of time going to Peggy's Cove, especially in the middle of the summer when it's busy and the parking lots are full. A great time to go to Peggy's Cove, and I know that considering what happened recently, the best time to go to Peggy's Cove is on a cold winter's day with a little onshore breeze, making sure that you're warmly dressed and you stay away from those slippery rocks. That's the time to go to Peggy's Cove. But consider the implications of a man who worked in the community nearby, who was injured, and was told, "We can get you a job as a parking lot attendant at Peggy's Cove." Now, the tour buses that arrive, they would see this big-hearted man, this man who would greet them with a smile and say, this is welcome to this community, and you can go here or you can go there, because that's the sort of person he would be. But the implication would be, what if, in the middle of the summer, when you have a visitor from Yorkton, Saskatchewan, as I did this summer, and of course, they want to go to Peggy's. They want to see the Swiss Era Memorial. They want to go and see coastal communities. They want to be able to stop in and pick up a few, maybe this is the wrong term, but I'm going to use it, trinkets, and so they can take them home to their family and relatives and friends. But when that person who's a local arrives at the parking lot and sees an injured worker who they know of the community was hurt in an accident, and the message is workers' compensation wouldn't help him, workers' compensation wouldn't be for him, wouldn't be there to assist him and his family with proper assistance. Instead, they told him, "You become a parking lot attendant." Mr. Speaker, let me tell you, that was a tearful day in that appeal. That was a tearful day for that fisherman. That was an upsetting day for his wife. That was an upsetting day for that rookie MLA in his first session at that time. And Mr. Speaker, I will tell you, that was this MLA from Timberley Prospect. Mr. Speaker, the battle goes on. The battle goes on in that case to this day. You think of that. That was during our first session when you and I sat on this side of the House, Mr. Speaker, when you sat in this chair right here, and I heard you so passionately speak on issues. I recall you standing in your place that day when those members on the other side, you were concerned about that open pit mine in Spring Hill. You at that time, Mr. Speaker, you were representing your constituents. So I want you, and I also recall what happened to that private member's bill and what the Liberal government at the time did to it. But that's history, and I know you have it stored away in your memory. But that's, after all, Mr. Speaker, the feelings that I came in during that first session. And I don't know whether I shared it with you or not on that day or not, but I can recall after coming home from that appeal, I remember coming home and saying, "What did I ever get in this business for? I can't help that man. They've turned him down. That man is hurt. That man needs help. And a government agency with funding in place has said no. Now, Mr. Speaker, I want you to tell you, if the workers of this province are going to have faith in the process, legislation has to be brought forth that they are not going to have to fight the courts and the lawyers and the judges. They want to feel, this happened to me at work. I can't provide for my family as I did previously, so I believe that I am deserving of this help. That's common sense, Mr. Speaker. These men and many of the people that I have dealt with as injured workers are men. But let me assure you, Mr. Speaker, of the examples that I'm going to bring to your attention, every one of them are hardworking or were hardworking contributors to the economy of this province. And I know, Mr. Speaker, particularly because of my friend from Cape Breton Nova, who has brought up examples from his personal experience in the steel plant. And I know of the examples that he speaks of because, of course, his father spent many, many long years in the plant in Sydney and contributed to the economy of Cape Breton. But, Mr. Speaker, those hard workers who have been injured at work deserve to be treated fairly. They deserve to be treated fairly. And the member from Cape Breton Nova mentioned to me after I had finished my comments the other day, he mentioned to me that he was concerned that the word suicide had been used. And Mr. Speaker, I did use that word. Suicide because of being an injured worker. You know, there's no statistics about it, of course. I mean, heaven forbid that we would look at a core issue like this and realize that a man or a woman has decided they no longer are really of any use to their family or to their community, or more importantly to themselves, to take their own lives. But my friend from Cape Breton Nova has brought examples forward in this House. He has mentioned to me on the sensitive topic of suicide that there are injured workers who have felt so useless and so frustrated and so hurt that what's the point? And Mr. Speaker, I bring to your attention the example that I've been asked to bring again forward on the floor of this House. When I received the call that night, I want you to know, Mr. Speaker, I didn't expect to talk to a man on the phone who said, "I'm in my garage, Bill, and I got a gun that's loaded. I've also got a quart of rum with me, Bill. Why don't you come down and share it with me, because I'm going to kill myself." Now, Mr. Speaker, that's a personal example. And I know members of this House, and members of the third party in particular, one member, always gets upset when I bring up cases like this. I have the permission to bring that forward, but I do not and will not use under any circumstances the name of that man, where he lives, or any of the other personal things of which would identify who he is, because, of course, he's still scrapping with WCB. And let me tell you that night, when I got that call at home, and when I took that drive and spent that night with that man, let me tell you, it was reassuring when the time came finally that the ammunition was removed and it was decided that it would be best for us both to go our separate ways, him off to his bed and me to return to my home about half an hour away. And Mr. Speaker, those are personal examples. Those are the types of things that legislators, those are the types of things that lawmakers, those are the types of things that people who work for WCB should know about, because those are the personal examples that hit home when it comes to dealing with injured workers. Now, this piece of legislation is going to hopefully move through this House, and it's going to go over to law amendments. And Mr. Speaker, as you know, I have the privilege of speaking in law amendments. And listening at law amendments. And Mr. Speaker, I have this question I asked injured workers all the time. I asked injured workers this question when they appeared before. And I know that some members of the government at that time and members of the Liberal Party perhaps will get upset with it, but it's a personal question, and it's a question that has to be answered. A question that I asked to an injured worker. So how does your injury affect your personal life? I tell them in advance I'm going to ask the question because I think it's important that if they said, I don't want to talk about the personal side of it, I don't ask the question. But I ask that question because that's what puts a real face on some of the implications of being an injured worker. So when this piece of legislation goes through to law amendments, and we begin to see, and we'll hear them, the injured workers as they appear in front of us, when they appear through that committee process, I encourage members opposite, and I know cabinet ministers can't be members of the committee, but I encourage them to come in and to listen to some of the comments that are going to be made. And we're going to hear from them on this piece of legislation again. So those rookie members who perhaps have never had, except through some personal connection, to deal with injured workers, come to law amendments, listen. If you can take a seat in your particular party, take a seat, engage them in a conversation, let them explain to you the effect of dealing with the bureaucracy and the administrivia and the medical forms and the doctors and the lawyers and the concerns that they will continually bring forward to us as legislators. And when that's complete, Mr. Speaker, let me tell you, people listening will understand the frustration of which I speak. The examples that I've brought forward, Mr. Speaker, are personal. They are examples that have affected me and affected me deeply. And I will assure you, rhetoric aside, this member will continue to push for every possible benefit in this province for injured workers. They are, after all, Nova Scotians who need our help. And with those comments, Mr. Speaker, I'll take my place.
Thank you. The honourable member for Pictou West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and it's a privilege for me this morning to have a few minutes to talk also on Bill 20, on the Workers' Compensation Act, an act to amend Chapter 10 of the Acts of 1994, 1995, the Workers' Compensation Act, and Chapter 7 of the Acts of 1996, the Occupational Health and Safety Act. Well, that's a complicated set of words to describe Bill 20, but basically it's all about finding a way to help our injured workers and to make sure that the system overall is fairer for everybody in the province, employers, workers, and certainly those that have had the misfortune of being injured. And I guess as an MLA here in Nova Scotia, I'm one of 52 members in this legislature, and I certainly know that it's an issue that has come up time and time again in our constituencies, and that we've each had to deal with problems and concerns of justices and injustices created by the workers' compensation system. And going back, I guess, to 1998 was my first initiation with the Workers' Compensation Act here in Nova Scotia. I suppose other than previous to that as an employer in this province, operating a small business where as an employer I had to pay premiums on behalf of the workers that I had in my employ. But my first real initiation to the whole system and how it really worked or didn't work, perhaps it might be a better description, probably came in 1998 when I started seeing injured workers en masse coming to my nomination meeting or to my constituency office. And in Pictou County, where I come from, there's a large and active group of organized injured workers, the Pictou County Injured Workers Association, aptly and capably led by Mary Lloyd. And probably Mary is recognized as one of the most capable individuals and most knowledgeable on the Workers' Compensation Act of perhaps of anybody in Nova Scotia. She's researched it, carefully studied it, lobbied for positive change, and has worked very hard with injured workers throughout Nova Scotia to try to bring some justice to their cases. And certainly here in Pictou County, I know has worked with many different individuals that have had the misfortune of being injured, and she's been able to lobby and give advice and help those individuals to better get some sense of justice in their own individual case. But I would think overall, if there's any particular issue that I've dealt with as an MLA, and certainly we get all kinds of issues, the whole gamut of, in rural Nova Scotia, there's a lot of issues coming to us around rural roads and certainly community service issues, environmental issues, quite often people dealing with not enough money to make ends meet, and those involve things like unemployment insurance or just getting through the red tape with community services. Lots of other particular concerns around employment, but of all the issues that we've had to deal with, probably issues around the Workers' Compensation Act have been some of the most difficult for us as legislators to deal with and try to find a workable solution. And so naturally, when a constituent comes into our office and has an issue, whether it's around trying to get a larger settlement from the WCB or a larger monthly payment, or just getting back on the system again after being there for a time and then the benefits being denied. It's one of the more difficult issues, I think, that as MLAs that we have to deal with, and it's trying to deal with the bureaucracy at the Workers' Compensation Office and trying to figure out what's the simplest and easiest way to get help for them, or to find a solution that's going to be acceptable. And some of these workers that have come into my office, Mr. Speaker, have been severely injured. They're walking with canes, sometimes with crutches, and they're coming in seeking my help, or I'm sure that every MLA has seen people coming into their office. Some are suffering certainly from chronic pain. Some are, maybe it's an invisible injury. You can't really see that they've had an injury, but they are certainly an injured worker, and if you meet them on the street, it's hard to recognize maybe that they are an injured worker. They're simply somebody that looks the same as you and I, perhaps as healthy as can be, but underneath they're scarred, they're hurting, they've got an injury that maybe has been diagnosed, or maybe it hasn't been diagnosed, but it's one that they're suffering with, not only physically, but probably suffering financially, because they're not getting an adequate benefit or an adequate amount of monthly income that's going to allow them to support their family and have a sense of dignity in their life. In some cases, I think you almost have to be a Philadelphia lawyer to get through the system and to figure out the nuances of the whole system. The injured worker goes to the reports their injury to their worker or to their employer, and then it goes on through the system, and they're on the benefits for a time, and then all of a sudden they get a letter and that they're denied without any real explanation. So they're told that they have to go for another medical examination or see a specialist and see if it's possible maybe to have their case reviewed and to see if they're eligible again for benefits. So it's rather disconcerting for that particular injured worker and his family when all of a sudden his source of income is cut off, and he has then to try to find other means to support himself, looking at social assistance or perhaps a family or other family members income in the family that would make ends meet. So overall, Mr. Speaker, it's a very complicated system, and it's difficult for the layperson that is an individual that maybe is working in a sawmill or working in the woodlot, working at a manufacturing business, and all of a sudden one day they have the very great misfortune of injuring their hand or their arm or their leg or some other body part that just doesn't allow them to continue on with their employment. So then they start to get into the system, and they go through a rather complicated process in order to determine whether they're eligible for benefits or not. So I just want to give you, maybe, Mr. Speaker, a couple examples of individuals that have come into my office and as injured workers, and just to show some of the frustration that they have held. I can remember one lady that came in to see me probably in, I think it was 1999. She had worked in an office for a business that produced a newspaper, and her job was very repetitive. She was on a typeset machine, and in time she developed what they call carpal tunnel syndrome, and she wasn't able then to use her wrist or use her fingers or her hand in her work that she had been doing for many, many years. And like, again, to meet her on the street, she looked the same as you and I, just an ordinary person, but she had an injury in her tendons, in her wrists, in her hand, that prevented her from doing the work that she'd been doing for, I think, about 15 years. And but her injury was caused by the stress and the continual job that she was doing over and over. And she had been on benefits, and then she was cut off for some reason, and they wanted more medical evidence. And she had to go see a specialist and get diagnosed and she almost had to prove again that she was an injured worker. And we did the best we could to help her and tried to lobby with some of the people in the workers' compensation system. And I think she went back to the tribunal, the WCAT, and through time she was able to get her benefits reinstated. But it just shows the difficulty of the system. She went months and months without any income because she was cut off, and she had to prove again that she was seriously injured and couldn't work, and she was almost to the point of desperation when she came to see me, and even to the point of tears. This was affecting her whole life. This was her life. Her life was almost being taken away from her, and she had no income to support her family. I remember another individual, Mr. Speaker, that came in to see me also. It was a gentleman that had worked in construction, and he was up a ladder one day, and unfortunately he fell off the ladder and fell backwards and ended up on a hard surface, and he hurt his back. And again, to look at him, he didn't look too bad. He seemed to have pretty good means. He could walk and carry on, but his back was seriously hurt. And again, he had been denied benefits. He'd been on benefits for a time, and for some reason they decided that he didn't deserve benefits any longer, and they cut him off. He had to go back through an appeal process and try to get reinstated, and in time, I believe he did. But it's just the whole system. It seems to work against the injured worker, and they have it really, really hard, really tough. And it's that period of time when they don't have any income that they start to feel, they lose their sense of worth, they lose their sense of dignity, and they feel like they're not contributing to society. They're not able to support their family. And it's really a hard, tough time for individuals in those situations. And so, as I mentioned, Mr. Speaker, I've had over the years contact with a number of different injured workers, both on an individual basis that have been my constituents that have come in to see me, and also in mass demonstrations. I think in 97, 98, there was a lot of MLA's offices that were occupied by injured workers. I can remember in particular the former member for Pictou East, Wayne Fraser. I think his office was taken over in the late 97, going into the 98 election campaign. And I can remember visiting that hall where there was probably 50 injured workers. They occupied that building and stayed there overnight and on a continual basis. And the media certainly was following their story. And it's to the point at some times where they really felt they had no other choice. They had to make their voices heard, and they would take over an MLA's office and 24 hours a day. And so in that particular case, in the former member for Pictou East, I think they were there for about a month, and trying to make their point. Then in some other case, I remember the member in Pictou Centre, Dr. Ham, his office was occupied for a time by a group of individuals, injured workers, as well as over the last year, I think there's been a few individuals on their own that have demonstrated and tried to get their point across that they needed help.
Dr. West allow for an introduction.
Sure.
Thank you. The honourable member for Victoria Lakes on the introduction.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the honourable member for allowing me to interrupt him in his dissertation and recognize people in the gallery. Mr. Speaker, before this House, I thanked everyone that I could remember during my reply to the speech from the throne. I made the statement that we always forget to mention somebody. The main one I forgot to thank, Mr. Speaker, was my wife, who was in the gallery this morning, so I better make a focus on that. I want to be in the good books for this coming weekend, Mr. Speaker. So my wife, Mary, is in the gallery. I also made a reference to the young grandson of mine who started his political career by campaigning 2 days before the election and got elected as class representative. And that's young Brennan McNeil up there. Brennan, you can stand to be recognized. And my wife is next to him. Next to that is the youngest grandson, Samuel McNeil. And then next there is our fiddle player and step dancer, Jessica McNeil. And of course, my son-in-law and assistant, Vince McNeil. And I would like the House to give them a warm welcome and a round of applause and welcome them to the House of Assembly. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. We certainly welcome our special guest to the gallery today, and I thank the honourable member for Pictou West, who now has the floor. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and it's always nice to have guests in our gallery, and oftentimes we look up at our gallery and there's lots of empty seats, but family members in particular, it's always nice to have with us. I was talking, Mr. Speaker, about some of the injured workers that I've met over the years, and I guess the most recent example I want to mention, just in the last 3 weeks or so, I've had an injured worker come into my office, and this was a gentleman that had, unfortunately, in his line of work, he was struck by a snowplow and was seriously injured. And, he had to fight for, this I think actually happened in Cape Breton in the early 90s. And he had to fight for many, many years to get a settlement from government. Finally, he was successful after a long legal case. And then in time, he was able also to get a compensation package from WCB. But his concern that he came to me with here most recently was he was really wanting to be able to commute that benefit to a lump sum payment. And he's run into a roadblock so far with that. He feels that he could, with his payout from the accident that he had from government, he was able to get a monthly income that's sufficient, and the small amount of the WCB monthly payment, he would prefer at this time to have that as a lump sum. So we're trying to help him with that. And So we are seeing injured workers coming into our constituency offices on a continual basis, and I think it's important maybe as legislators that we get all the information that's available and have good contact with the folks down on South Street there at the WCB headquarters. And one thing I did find helpful just within the last 2 or 3 weeks, I did get a call, I guess, in relation to this particular case, of the liaison person, I guess you'd call her, that works for WCB, that deals in particular with MLA's offices. And I guess she's a good contact for us to go through to deal with individual cases, and then she can get through the fabric and through the network within the offices at the WCB. Mr. Speaker, this bill that we're dealing with here, Bill number 20, has come about basically as a result of the court case that came down on October the 3rd by the Supreme Court of Canada, that in a unanimous decision the court ruled that the province of Nova Scotia could no longer, through the WCB system, discriminate against injured workers who are suffering from chronic pain. And but the history of the WCB in this province certainly goes back a long, long ways. And almost a century now we've had a workers' compensation system in Nova Scotia. In fact, Nova Scotia was the second province in Canada to recognize the need for a workers' compensation system that would work for employers and would work for workers, and in the end would work for injured workers. And I think the principles upon which the system was founded were good, and it goes all the way back to the year 1910, when through a similar system in Ontario, there was a WCB system set up there, and our province looked at it and continued to build on it. And the system actually was created by the ideas of Judge Sir William Meredith, who later became a Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. And he looked at how workers were protected or were compensated in other countries around the world. He looked at systems in the United States, in France, Belgium, England, and Germany, and by studying the best that those countries had to offer, he came up with a set of principles to found the Workers' Compensation Act in this country. And those principles are called the Meredith Principles, in honor of Judge William Meredith. And basically, Mr. Speaker, there's 5 principles upon which the Workers' Compensation Act in this province are founded. And I just want to take a minute to run over those principles. The first one was that there would be no fault. The no-fault compensation. Injured workers would be compensated regardless of the fault, whether it was accidents or just that. They're accidental, and nobody certainly wants to go out and be injured. So it was important to recognize that fault really was irrelevant, and the compensation then became the focus of the Act. The second Meredith principle is around collective liability. The total cost of the compensation system is shared by all employers. Now, that was the principle, but unfortunately, not all employers became involved in the workers' compensation system, and there's still many today that are not included under the Act. And I'll be coming to that in a few minutes, the idea of having full protection for all workers, whether they're an employee or whether they're self-employed. But the principle was that all employers would contribute to a common fund to protect the workers. Third principle, the Meredith principle, is security of payment. A fund would be established to guarantee that compensation monies will be available. Injured workers are assured of prompt compensation and future benefits. So there always would be a guarantee that if somebody got injured, that there would be a fund there available to pay out benefits either in a lump sum or in monthly installments. Exclusive jurisdiction was the fourth Meredith principle, that all compensation claims are directed solely to the Compensation Board and nowhere else. So the board then is the decision maker. They have final authority for all claims. And nowhere else can you go to seek help. And finally, an independent board. The governing board is both self-supporting and non-political. That was the principle. Now, whether that's happened or not is a question for debate. But the idea was that no political interference would come on the board when a decision was to be made by the panel. So those Meredith principles, Mr. Speaker, were the founding basis for the Workers' Compensation Act in Nova Scotia. And, I think they're strong, they're good, and in many ways we need to get back to make sure that those founding principles are still adhered to today. And I think if they were, we'd have a stronger legislation and more protection for workers. Over the years, of course, there's been various challenges to the legislation, and various court cases have come forward that have changed some of the ideals, I guess, upon which the act was based. But when a court makes a decision that applies, then that can change how things operate from there on out. But I know there's been different court cases that have influenced what the payouts or what the board can or cannot do from there on out. And in some ways, that's been part of the difficulties, because when a court decision comes down and they make a ruling, then it sometimes only applies back to that certain date. So if an injured worker was injured before that, they're working under an older set of rules. And if they're injured after the court case has been delivered, then there's a new set of rules. So injured workers are not always treated equally. Some have better benefits than others, depending on when they were injured, which doesn't seem to make sense in many ways. But on and off, the Act continued to serve Nova Scotians for better or for worse through the decades from 1915 on. And as I said, there were some changes in the Act with court cases. And in the year 1996, there was a new Act proclaimed here in Nova Scotia under then Labour Minister Jay Abbas. And that's sometimes referred to as the Act that brought in the clinical rating system, or in more layman's terms, that's sometimes referred to as the meat chart. And that Act allowed for compensation to injured workers more or less based on the amount of loss that they had physically as a percentage of their wages. So if somebody lost a finger, you'd get a certain amount of compensation based on your inability to do your particular job. If you lost a whole arm, you got more compensation. If you lost an arm and a leg, you received even further compensation. Didn't seem to be totally fair, because it was a judgmental decision by somebody that decided how much the injured worker would get, and it's hard to put a value on an arm or a leg as compared to what you're able to do within your job. But overall, I think that led to some of the demonstrations and some of the mass groups of injured workers that perhaps came here to this legislature and were occupying MLA's offices in the late 90s. It was because of that act and the meat chart emphasis that was really perceived and was seen as unfair to many injured workers. And so it became a problem. It became a major problem, and the injured workers weren't going away. They were making themselves known. They were turning up on MLA's doorsteps on a continual basis, and here at the House as well. So I think probably that's what might have led to, in 1998, the government of the day decided to set up a select committee and to investigate the system and why it wasn't working, what was working, and to make recommendations on how to improve the system for employers and for workers, and most of all, perhaps for injured workers. So I had the privilege, Mr. Speaker, I guess in 1998 when I was here in the House before, to be appointed to that select committee. And our task or our mandate was to travel around the province and to visit with people that had a reason to be concerned about the Workers' Compensation Act as it was at that time. And it was an all-party committee. There were 3 members appointed from each party in the House, and we held public meetings and received input from employers, from labor groups, from doctors and healthcare professionals that were involved in the system. But most of all, I think, and we had hundreds of submissions from Nova Scotians, from Yarmouth to Bridgewater, New Minas, here in Halifax, Truro, Stellarton, Amherst, Port Hawkesbury, Sydney, and we heard from a lot of different individuals, but maybe 2 or 3 stories I want to relate that come perhaps fresh to my mind from injured workers that really stood out for me at that time and really showed the frustration and the pain that some of these injured workers were suffering in their lives. There was one lady I can recall that came before our committee in Port Hawkesbury, and she told of the pain and the suffering of what it was like to be an injured worker. And I looked at her, and she didn't look any different than you or I in many regards, Mr. Speaker. And then she started to cry, and she just said, "This has just been so hard on myself and my family," and it was a difficult situation for her. But she was not the injured worker. She was there on behalf of her husband, who was the injured worker. He was at home. He wasn't able to come out to the hearings, and so she gave the perspective, a point of view of a spouse of an injured worker. And it took us a while to figure that out, that she wasn't the injured worker. It was actually on behalf of her husband that she was telling us this information. But a real heart-wrenching story, and how it had affected her and her family and her children, and not only physically and financially, but emotionally. There was a real attachment of the stress and strain of this injury had caused this particular family. I can remember another situation. It was in Truro, and there was an injured worker came before us, and he had a real tough job of walking. He was walking with 2 canes, and he had been severely injured in an accident. And one of the roles of the Workers' Compensation Board is to try to rehabilitate workers and to see if they can be found a suitable job in some other occupation or something different. Anyway, this gentleman had lost an arm, his right arm, in a workplace accident, and also had injured his back and his legs, and he had difficulty walking. But one thing, he could still drive his car. And I don't know how or why, but it was decided that the rehabilitation program for this individual was that he would retrain as a truck driver, an 18-wheeler. And so it didn't seem to make sense to him, but somebody pushed the agenda that he should be retrained as a truck driver. And so he went before the board, and that's what was decided. They would retrain him as a truck driver. But so he went to the school out in Masstown and and start to take some training, but they soon realized that there was no way that he could do this type of training because he had lost his right arm. And if you can imagine a truck driver, well, he might be able to steer with his left arm, but there's no way he could go over and change the gears and keep it, and steer at the same time. So I don't know who or why decided that this one-armed gentleman should be trained as a truck driver, but in the end, of course, he had to give it up, and but it was just one of those rulings from the board that didn't seem to make sense. But hopefully, he's found some other type of training. I remember another case, Mr. Speaker, when I think we were in Amherst, and there was a doctor come before our board, and she was. Her role was to interview and to test and to diagnose injured workers. And she had indicated at our hearing that night that she was told that they wanted a certain diagnosis. And she didn't think that was right. So she quit as a board doctor and left the employ of the WCB, but she was told that they wanted a certain medical evidence report, and it just shows the length that the board was going to try to deny injured workers their right to justice. So at any rate, Mr. Speaker, in the end, this select committee, after a few months of travel around the province and getting input from many employers, health groups, injured workers, and others, finally put a report together, and it came back here to this legislature in the form of Bill 90. The Bill 90, as some will remember, I think it came before this House in 1999, and I really had hope, I really had faith that out of all the stories that we had heard from injured workers, that something worthwhile and good would come out of this. I said, surely, with all these stories of injured workers and their pain and suffering that we've heard, been recorded, been written up in the media, and I said, surely we'll get some good help here for injured workers. And I had faith that would happen. But then when the bill came here before the House, it seemed that the government of the day, the Liberal government, and the Conservative opposition at that time sort of gutted the bill, and it didn't end up with any real help or real serious recommendations that would help injured workers. Chronic pain, I guess, was one of the big items that we had heard that over and over people were suffering with long-term pain known as chronic pain, and it just wasn't what I had hoped that would come out of what we'd heard around the province. So Bill 90 didn't work, and injured workers were still unhappy. I think employers are still unhappy. So what was best for the injured worker? Well, it certainly wasn't in Bill 90. And what was best for the board? Well, maybe that's where the government of the day and the third party at that time combined to prevent real change that would help. Injured workers seen that there was a bias against them still, and some have described it as an institutional bias against them, and it just really wasn't working for them. So out of that, after the failure of Bill 90 to really address the issue of helping the system or helping injured workers, this government in early 2000, I think it was, decided to review it all again, to have another task force look at the situation and see what could be recommended. And I believe it was in April of 2001, the Dorsey report came down, and the Dorsey Commission or task force was similar, traveled all around Nova Scotia, went to all the different communities that probably the Select Committee had also visited. I'm sure they heard from some of the same people that our Select Committee had heard from. And but the Dorsey Committee was a broad section of individuals that made up of representatives of the province, that with people that had some real background in workers' compensation knowledge and history. And Mr. Dorsey himself was a graduate of the Dalhousie Law School and is recognized probably across Canada as one of the foremost experts in workers' compensation. He had worked as a chair of the Workers' Compensation Act Committee review in Saskatchewan. He'd served as a special minister's representative studying the Saskatchewan Workers' Compensation Board, and he's also served as chair of the Board of Governors of the British Columbia Workers' Compensation Board. So he came very well qualified, very knowledgeable in the Workers' Compensation Act, and brought a lot of expertise to this province when he set up this committee to study the issue here in the province. But it wasn't just Mr. Dorsey. There's also on the committee was Michael Power. He's the vice chair of Power, Dempsey, Cooper, and Leaf from Bridgewater. And I had met Mr. Power when he served as counsel to our select committee in 1999. Also, Janet Hazelton, representing the Nova Scotia Nurses Union, brought a medical perspective to the committee. Carol McCullough from the Construction Association of Nova Scotia. She had her master's degree in Atlantic Canada Studies and completed her thesis on workers' compensation. Gary Penny from the Cape Breton Injured Workers Association was also a committee member. Steve Rankin from the Canadian Manufacturers and Exporters Association represented industry on the committee. Final two members were Bob Cook from the Nova Scotia Association of Health Organizations, and he'd worked in the healthcare field for almost 25 years. And finally, Betty Jean Sutherland from Pictou County, and representing the Nova Scotia Federation of Labor. And she had served on the Occupational Health and Safety and the Workers' Compensation Committee for the Canadian Labor Congress. So as you can see, Mr. Speaker, there was a very broad cross-section of members representing industry, labor, injured workers, and medical professionals, as well as Mr. Dorsey as the head of the board. So these 8 members of this committee they come up with after their deliberations of visiting around the province, come up with a consensus report, and they had a lot of good recommendations, a lot of ideas that would improve the workers' compensation system. And I just want to briefly run over a few of those recommendations that were put forward by the Dorsey Committee. One thing they suggested was to repeal the 3-worker exclusion rule. Way the system is set up, that individuals with or companies that employ less than 3 don't have to be covered by workers' compensation rule. And we're saying that all workers, no matter if they got 1 employee, 2 employee, or everybody should be covered.
Order, please. The honourable member allow for another introduction. Thank you. The Honourable Minister of Education on introduction.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'd like to draw the attention of the members of the House to the East Gallery, where some very special guests are with us this morning. This week is National Science and Technology Week, so we've invited some students who competed in the Canada-wide Science Fair in May to display their exhibits here at the Province House, and they are downstairs, and I hope that members will take some time and go down and visit those exhibits. Now, I'd like to introduce 4 students, Katie Atkinson, Emily Clark, Natalie Lamoth, and Jay McNeil, who were participants in that science fair in Calgary. They're all from the Truro area, and Katie and... Katie and Jay both won silver medals, and Natalie received an honorable mention, another prize. And I should also mention that my colleagues from Colchester North and Colchester South Bible Hill Junior High, which is one of the schools where two of these students attended last year. Students from all three of our constituencies go to that school. Also accompanying them is Michael Price, who is the principal of the Valley Elementary School, and he was the co-chair of the committee that won the bid to have the Chignecto Central area host the 2007 Canada-wide Science Fair. As well, there are two parents in the gallery accompanying their young people this morning. One parent, okay, I know her, Karen McNeil, who is Jay's mother. And there are also two people from the Department of Education, Marilyn Webster, who is our science consultant, and Cliff Coviduck, who works in the testing division. Both of these individuals are very active volunteers with the Nova Scotia Youth Experience in Science Foundation, which supports science fairs in our province. Marilyn's the president of that group, and she's also on the board of directors for the Youth Science Fair Foundation Canada, which oversees the National Science Fair. And I'm delighted to see such enthusiasm for learning about science from our area. And I would ask all members of the host to join me in giving these young people and those accompanying them a very warm welcome.
Thank you. We certainly welcome our guests to the gallery today, and certainly welcome our youth to Province House. We hope they enjoy their stay with us today. Thank you. Thank you to the honourable member for Pictou West. Has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I certainly welcome our guests as well, and I did see the setup of the display downstairs there earlier, and I guess as a former science teacher, I have an interest in having a look at that, and I will be going down to have a peek at it after. I want to come back, maybe, Mr. Speaker, to the science of this workers' compensation bill. And I was mentioning the Dorsey report that came out in 2001. And there was a number of recommendations in there that the Dorsey Committee thought would be important to have in our legislation here in Nova Scotia and to work towards improvements in the bill. And one of them, as I mentioned, Mr. Speaker, was repealing the three-worker exclusionary rule, as the system is set up that if an employer has less than 3 employees, then they don't have to be covered by the Workers' Compensation Act. I suppose if they chose to be involved, they could, but generally many employers would not opt into the workers' compensation system unless they had to. And so a small employer with 1 or 2 or 3 employees were not obligated to be in the system. And I know some people, probably employers purposely chose to keep their business to a certain size that they wouldn't have to be employed. For example, woods contractors. Some of them were at one time employing 10 or a dozen or 15 men in the woods, and certainly absolutely had to be, were covered under the system. But with technology and changes to the way the wood is harvested these days, many of them downsized, and a lot of wood now is not cut by a power saw, but it's usually with a processor and a skidder. And so they could get away with maybe just two employees, one to run the processor that cut the trees, and the other one with a forwarder or skidder that would take it out of the woods. So therefore, they found it was a whole lot cheaper to operate because the rates are very high in the forest industry. I think it's somewhere around 12% of your payroll went towards workers' compensation premiums. So if you could cut your costs down by 12%, many were choosing to do that. However, if an accident were to occur to one of those employees, they're not covered under the system, and I suppose that employee then could sue their employer, and that is one of the benefits, of course, of the whole workers' compensation system. This is that when the system was set up in 1915, that there was a trade-off between the employer and the employee. The employer would fund the whole system, would pay for the cost of the premiums, and make sure there was a fund there that would pay out benefits if a worker was injured. But on the other hand, the workers did not have the right to sue their employer. So it was a trade-off that seemed to work reasonably well for both parties. The Dorsey report, which came out in 2 years ago, also recommended that casual employees should be covered on the workers' compensation system. Part-time workers, some of them are excluded now from protection, but when you think about it, maybe a part-time worker coming on staff, a young person or really of any age, probably is less experienced than a full-time worker, and perhaps they need coverage as much or more than anyone. Self-employed people also are not covered under the system at the present time unless they choose to, unless they opt in and want to be covered under workers' compensation. But the Dorsey report is recommending that people that work for themselves as the owners of a business should also be covered under the Act. The Dorsey report also recommended things like the maximum insurable earnings that would be covered should rise to $44,500. The lump sum payout or computation on demand should be available if an injured worker wants to take their benefits in one lump sum, then they should be allowed to do that. As it is now, they're usually restricted. They're only on a monthly basis, and they should at least have the option to make a choice. There were other recommendations in there around medical opinions, making them more fair, not making it as complicated. I remember, Mr. Speaker, one injured worker that came before our select committee in Stellarton, and he had had a head injury of some type from an accident, and he went to the board, and they weren't satisfied that he had an injury that was that could be compensated for, and so the local doctor said no, that so he was denied. He didn't get his benefits, but he appealed it, and he went to see a specialist in the city here in Halifax, and again he was denied, but he didn't give up, and he went back to the board and said, you know, I'm an injured worker. I have a head injury. I cannot work. You've got to help me. And so he appealed again to the board, and this time they sent him off to see a specialist in Chicago. And lo and behold, yes, the specialist did diagnose him with a head injury, and so he was able to get benefits. But it took a long, long time for him fighting against the system in order to be compensated for what truly was an injury that was, he needed help, and he needed to be able to support his family. So the Dorsey Committee recommended a few other things, like the WCAT, the Workers' Compensation Appeals Tribunal, there should be no statutory time limits, and they should correct errors as they come along. And if an injured worker needs to appeal, if he has new evidence or he feels he's not being properly diagnosed, then he has the right to go back to WCAT and reappeal and try to get a fair decision. There were other recommendations in there on adjudication and appeal process, as I mentioned. I guess the final thing I'll mention is the board they thought should be reconstituted. The Workers' Compensation Board, as we know it, is made up of government appointees and some appointees from labor groups and employers groups. But they recommended that the Act be amended to reconstitute the Board of Directors of the Workers' Compensation Board to have all the responsibilities of the current Board of Directors, plus to have oversight for the Occupational Health and Safety Division and the Workers' Advisors Program and the Workers' Compensation Appeals Tribunal. have it all under one board, where really to start from scratch and to shake up the whole system down there on South Street and have some fair-minded people that will make fair decisions. So this report came to government, Mr. Speaker, in 2001, and I believe the government reported that they were going to report on it and make some recommendations. But of course, with everything, there's a cost, and they recommended in the Dorsey report that premiums go up to employers by 3 cents. Now, I guess that came out of government, that the premiums would increase by 3 cents to $2.57 per hundred to help pay for some of these recommendations. Seemed like a reasonable request. But the government has been slow to act on these recommendations, and I think mainly because of the unfunded liability that's there of, I believe it's around $240 million. And the board feels they want to pay down that unfunded liability much quicker than what the Dorsey people were recommending. And that, if that happens, then there's going to be less money to help injured workers and to institute some of these changes that are recommended. I guess it all came to a head, Mr. Speaker, on the 3rd of October of this year, when the Supreme Court unanimously ruled 9-0 that the Dorsey report had some good recommendations, and that the issue around chronic pain in particular was unconstitutional, that the Workers' Compensation Board could not discriminate against injured workers if they had chronic pain. And really that's been the crux of the whole problem that we heard in the Select Committee, and I know the Dorsey Committee also heard. Chronic pain is something that's hard to see, it's hard to identify, it's hard to describe what it is. And I just want to take a minute, Mr. Speaker, to give a definition of chronic pain. Chronic pain is described as, or it's medically described as pain that persists for an unusually long time, or is disproportionate to the initial injury, or can't be supported by more specific medical diagnosis. And there's no question that there's many injured workers in this province that are suffering, that are walking around if they're able, and really do have chronic pain. And so the Supreme Court ruled that the province of Nova Scotia, through their WCB, can no longer discriminate against injured workers that suffer from chronic pain. So I guess overall, Mr. Speaker, I'll sum up here. In Bill 20, as I mentioned at the start, I think it's important that we get back to the principles on which the Act was founded back in 1915, the Meredith principles. They were sound then, and somehow we've strayed away from some of that, and we need to make sure that the Act is founded on good, solid principles like the Meredith principles. The bill here that's before us today is, I guess in itself is not, is not bad for what's there, but there's a whole lot missing. There's a whole lot of things from the Dorsey report that are not there. Issues around universality, for example, are not in this particular bill anywhere that I could see. There's not a lot of support to change the medical evidence system that where injured workers have to go and prove that before a doctor or a specialist that they're suffering from a particular affliction that prevents them from returning to their place of employment, or at least prevents them from going back full time. I didn't see anything in the bill either around the help for widows. I can remember on the Select Committee when we went to Sydney, there were a lot of widows that came before us, widows of miners that had died in the mines, either through a direct workplace accident or through black lung disease or some other debilitating disease, that now these widows were left on their own and without any compensation or very, very little help for them. So there's a number of things not in the bill, Mr. Speaker, that I feel would strengthen it, make it a better system, make the Act stronger. The second part of the bill is around occupational health and safety, and it mentions in this Act that this is going to be taken away from the Workers' Compensation Board. There's no mention of where it's going, or is it going to the Department of Environment and Labor, or is it going to a private company, or just where it's heading. So I just want to point out that I think we need a little further explanation on where occupational health and safety is going to end up. And I know it has in the past been with the Department of Environment and Labor, and but where it's going to be now, it's not too clear. The other thing I'll mention is that a lot of the specifics, a lot of the details are left, I guess, to the government of the day to enforce through regulations. And, you know, that can be changed at any moment, at any time. The cabinet of the day can decide that they like something or they don't like something, and they can add to it or even subtract from it. And so there's a lot missing in this bill that legislators here in this House, I think, should have the right to have some input into, but that's just not there. So there's too much, I believe, left to the will of the government of the day, and may end up supporting things that are not necessarily in the best interest of workers in this province. So I guess overall, Mr. Speaker, I've rambled on here about the workers' compensation bill for the last few minutes, but I think it's important that we make this bill as strong as we can. I'm looking forward when we go to the next stage at law amendments, and perhaps we can strengthen up what's here and make it even better, to make it fair, to make it